So welcome everyone to this webinar series organized by the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action. I'm Joanna Wedge and I work as the Implementation and Capacity Development Advisor for the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group. The aim of the series is for child protection practitioners to improve their ability to build staff and partners' capacity to implement the minimum standards. Today's session, I've been looking forward to quite a while. It looks at developing and using CPiE learning and development strategies. We know that building capacity of new and even more experienced staff has been a big challenge for our sector, with no common entry point into child protection in emergencies and a lot of turnover in personnel. Every year, we do hundreds of workshops for staff, partners, government counterparts, volunteer groups, community associations, children, etc. So how do we look at this in a strategic way? That's the question we're going to tackle today. The session is scheduled for an hour, and we do hope that you can stay for the whole time. There will be a couple of opportunities to take your questions, so please do write them into the question box. And we're recording the session, which will be released on the Alliance website later this month. So with no further ado, I'd like to present our speaker, Natalie McCauley. As many of you know, Natalie has had a long and varied career in child protection and child protection in emergencies. For several years, she was the CPWG's global focal point on learning and development, and there she oversaw the finalization of the face-to-face training package and several specialized packages, such as that one on coordination and on the child protection rapid assessment. She guided the CPWG's transition from standalone workshops to more strategic engagement in learning. Today she'll share with us some of the tools she developed and the approach as the Alliance moves forward. She joins us from Australia, so welcome, Natalie.
Thank you, Joanna, for the introduction and also to the CPMS working group for this initiative. As Joanna said, my name is Natalie McCauley, and many of you do already know me. I really like to encourage you over the webinar to ask questions via the chat box and the question box throughout, because we'll have 2 spots throughout the webinar to answer those questions, and I'll do my best to answer throughout if possible. So welcome everyone. Today we're going to go through a number of learning outcomes, including understanding what is learning and development and what it is in the concept of a strategy, looking at the overview and the importance of developing a learning and development strategy, how this thinking aligns strategically with the work of the Alliance, and tools and resources that are available. So I want to just talk initially about the current environment in which we're all working. And Joanna did mention some of the challenges that we're dealing with, but we've done a lot of research over the last few years, and we have a much greater understanding of where we actually stand. So basically, the CPiE sector continues to fight for recognition across the humanitarian sector. And although the CPiE sector has successfully developed strong methods, tools and standards, it continues to suffer from a shortage of high-quality practitioners to provide services in the field. And the entire humanitarian system is massively overstretched and struggling to cope with increasing humanitarian emergencies, large and small, with 2016 being the highest number of simultaneous IASC Level 3 emergencies ever experienced. But, I mean, let's not focus on the challenges as much as we've also made a lot of great strides over the last 15 years, and many of you have been part of that process. There is a core group of excellent engaged CPiE practitioners nationally and globally. Worldwide, there is not enough of these practitioners to meet the needs of rising numbers, particularly in increasing complex emergencies, and learning and development is an urgent need for the entire CPiE sector. There is a need to focus in particular on national level learning and development, and we do have minimum standards and tools that are strong additions to the CPiE sector. I'm not sure how many of you were able to look at the gap analysis. We have sent around a number of the resources in a pack, and the 2015 gap analysis is part of that resource folder that we sent around. In that document, there is this very detailed graph around the gap analysis. And what it illustrates really for me is that we have such large numbers of professionals that are needing support. And it's really clear that the old ways that we've been working really are not going to fill this type of gap. So what is pedagogy? This is a word that is thrown around a lot and not necessarily used in the manner that it should be, but basically it's very simple, the concept. The pedagogy is the art and science of how something is taught and the method behind the learning. Pedagogy includes how the teaching occurs, the approach to the teaching and learning, and the way the content is delivered and what the students learn as a result of this process. So it might sound like another use of jargon, because we do have a lot of jargon in our area, but it's really critical to look at how we are going about learning and development across the Alliance and across our sector. So let's just have an overview of our learning and development principles. These were originally developed during the time of the CPWG, Child Protection Working Group, but we have actually adapted them a little bit during the transition period. Basically, learning the learning environment needs to be supportive and productive. We need to promote independence, interdependence, and self-motivation. Practitioners should have their needs, backgrounds, perspectives, and interests reflected in the learning. Practitioners are challenged and supported to develop deep levels of thinking and application. Learning connects strongly with communities and practice beyond the training. Learning connects strongly to outcomes and results for children impacted by emergencies. And forms of assessment, competencies, and prerequisites are an integral part of the entire learning process. At this point, I just want to remind people of there's another webinar coming on Friday on engaging the humanitarian learner, and there's a number of questions already being raised in this regard, including how do we help CPiE staff transition from workers with a million things to do to students who are ready to learn and participate in various formats, not just in face-to-face. So our approach to learning, which is basically our pedagogy. We want to ensure high quality and consistent training materials are available to CPiE practitioners. We want varied forms of delivery, so not just face-to-face. We want to ensure access to key resource people and trainers that are able to deliver, adapt, and contextualize materials. We want to concentrate on flexibility, so consideration given to the various ways the resources and tools may be used and delivered. A learning and development vision with needs assessments and strategies guiding the training plans. We want to ensure monitoring and evaluation, and that the development of M&E tools to adequately measure and assess results is really critical here. Encompassing adult learning principles, mindful of culture, and with an aim for translation into various languages. We will use face-to-face training at various levels, development of global and regional pools of professionals, mentoring programs, online learning modules and packages, webinars and online meetings, communities of practice, and ongoing coaching, including the availability of these coaches to support those in the field. In short, these would be grouped or can be grouped into learning by doing, on-the-job training and access to supports via various programs, learning from others through supervision, coaching and mentoring programs, and learning from training in various formats, including face-to-face, but also using technology and using e-learning platforms and webinar opportunities. Our approach to learning and development still focuses and is linked to the competency-based framework, which will definitely be revised. But we would definitely encourage people to use this framework, even though it is being revised, because it has a lot of wonderful elements to it that can be really useful when you're developing a strategy. And certainly the broader strategy of our sector focuses on the competencies for child protection programming in emergencies, which is a component of the competency-based framework, and to some extent the core humanitarian competencies, and to a lesser extent the core child protection competencies. All needs assessment strategies, plans, and even training programs will need to be developed with this competency framework aligned. So what is a learning and development strategy, also known as L&D? So just in case you see that there. In its broadest sense, it's an organisational sector strategy that articulates the workforce capabilities, skills or competencies required and how these can be developed to ensure a sustainable, successful strategic outcomes. Recent research has emphasised the importance of strategic human resource management aligning to the overall organisational sector strategy. So it's really important that you get the buy-in of those areas in your organisation or across our sector as a whole when we develop these strategies. Now, during our time doing the global CPiE TOTs over the last sort of 4 years, we came up with a lot of challenges that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Many of these challenges are directly related with face-to-face manifestations of learning and development, but they can be thought of more broadly. There's definitely difficulties on how we're going to deliver learning to frontline staff when they can't get to spend time outside of their job at workshops or even on online platforms. The level of participants, the lack of foundational training, learning qualifications, not having management buy-in, even for creative online options. Online options seem hard and cumbersome, so if you're not an IT expert, people feel like they can't build them or do them. How to use and adapt material and approaches to different contexts and forms of delivery. Training as a one-off event rather than a flexible ongoing process. Problems with terminology. Administrative issues were a very large challenge that came up, and lack of funding. So this is why we're moving towards an approach that is aligned more with a learning and development strategy that is evidence-based and linked to sectoral outcomes, so we can overcome a lot of these very normal challenges that have been identified. So let's emphasize this a little bit more. Let's look at this deeply. Why a learning and development strategy? Well, when effectively designed and implemented, a learning and development strategy can deliver capabilities, competencies, and skills required to support sustainable success. Increasingly, there's a need for innovation in the delivery of skills and knowledge to support change, particularly in a rapidly changing external environment. Professionals, therefore, need to be prepared to think creatively about learning and development interventions through design, delivery, and assessment to develop a flexible strategy that meets our ongoing needs. By focusing on strategic objectives, the learning and development function can help drive change and sustainable performance. The learning and development strategy should reflect, reinforce the approach within the broad sector strategies, as well as organisational strategies and the broader humanitarian approaches and strategies, including human resource programming, in amongst the humanitarian response plan. Ultimately, the learning and development strategy should reflect the overarching strategies and drive success directly towards that. Just as a reminder, our learning and development strategy is a tool that aims to develop a workforce's capabilities, skills and competencies to create sustainable, successful organisational outcomes or sectorial outcomes, and it's really important that it's a part of any sort of overall strategy that we're developing. It must be continually updated and aligned as strategies change and the environment in which we work changes all the time. And in line with this, we can't forget about the operational and cultural factors that we often overlook. So as well as this sort of broader sector aims, an L&D strategy should align with sectorial organisational culture and also address operational realities and constraints. So let's look at some examples. The first one is already up there. All work is a process of continual learning and improvement, and this can be the starting point for creating a learning organisation or a sector that is considered in a similar way as a learning organisation. Expenditure on learning and development should be encouraged only where there's measurable benefit to the sector. Engaging professionals across the sector in a continuous learning journey might be seen as a means to build human capital and engage workforce. Learning should be targeted on key performance needs. Individuals are more likely to engage with learning which addresses performance needs, but learning should also be linked to an individual's aspirations to advance their career, which is why we also have a plan for individual learners. Learning and development may cover other aims than simply a narrow definition of sector benefit. They can support the sector's wider responsibility in the humanitarian field. For example, by taking community needs into account when offering broader internships and other sort of adaptations of jobs like volunteer roles. Learning is a cost to the sector, which, though it delivers benefits in terms of results, should be delivered efficiently and effectively. Talent development is an investment for the future, so an organisation or a sector may continue to build future skills even during an absence of funding. Personal career development is critical for retention and engagement and should be linked to sector objectives. And learning should be part of a wider sector strategy of ongoing investment in people, ultimately with a wider view of benefits to beneficiaries and the beneficiary experience, increasing results for children. Okay, so we need to just look at now how we identify needs. So identifying learning and development needs involves the assessment of professional capabilities alongside an understanding of current or anticipated gaps in knowledge and skills. So this analysis can be conducted at the individual, team, sectorial and organisational level. And I think we need to be reminded of that because sometimes we only do it at one of those levels. In any case, the outcomes can identify the appropriate learning provisions required to enable sustained performance, and results should be closely aligned to the overall sector strategy. The clear and systemic identification of learning and development needs is a key aspect of ensuring effective learning provisions across an organisation and a sector. It's important, though, that the process can be rigid, and sometimes it can be a box-ticking exercise unless it's aligned with strategic requirements. The need for sectorial agility means that L&D must act quickly to deliver a learning needs analysis when required. The process demands an appropriate mapping of needs linking the learner to the desired outcomes. Any gaps should be interpreted and prioritised in connection with the wider sectorial and humanitarian approaches and strategies. Implementing a formal learning needs analysis, which is called an LNA often, also sometimes known by an alternative term such as a training needs analysis or a capacity needs analysis. So a TNA or a CNA or a training and learning needs analysis, which is a TLNA. All these may be seen as like a health check on the skills, talent and capabilities of a sector. It is based on the systemic gathering of data about professional capabilities and sector demands for skills alongside an analysis of implications of new and changed roles for changes in capability. This process should flow from a strategy, and its aim is to produce a plan for the sector and an organisation to make sure there is sufficient capability to sustain performance. It is also important to consider local level statutory requirements. For example, certain positions require specified levels of health and safety expertise, or in our case, the qualifications needed to do casework in some locations requires a certification process. So the levels of a learning needs analysis. For the sector and organisation as a whole, to understand the amount and types of learning needed to ensure that all professionals have the right capabilities to deliver this strategy. For a specific project or area of work, new projects and opportunities require new ways of working or reorganisation, while restructuring also necessitates changes in roles, and not to forget local level requirements and statutory needs, and linking individual areas of work for their own personal learning and development needs to also be considered by the sector. Often this is carried out as part of a performance review and support by individual learning plans. I just want to go over an approach that is being mentioned in a lot of different research, L&D research studies at the moment, and it's called RAM, and it just sort of synthesizes things a little bit better. It's just something you might be able to remember. So while it's critical that any assessment of learning needs should be careful and thorough, in our rapidly changing environment, such a process also needs to be agile and readily responsive. This approach helps us to focus the analysis on the key sectorial outcomes in the following ways. With relevance, how existing or planned learning provision will meet new opportunities and challenges in the sector. Alignment. If the plan is to deliver a changed L&D offer, it is critical for L&D to talk to key sector leaders and other stakeholders about what they're seeking to deliver and how the function can help them achieve it. It's also important to ensure that L&D is aligned to other key strategies such as sector development, engagement, and other aspects of the management of human resources. Alignment with strategies and its communication and resource mobilisation strategies and other dimensions of sector strategies gives focus, purpose, and relevance to our L&D strategy. And we mustn't forget measurement. It's also critical that the L&D function measures and evaluates the interventions effectively and consistently. It may be helpful to use a mix of evaluation methods such as return on investment and broader measures of expected change and improvement such as return on expectation, and to link L&D outcomes to key performance indicators, or KPIs you might know them as. So let's just go into some quick steps to the L&D strategy. Determining the learning needs via a capacity needs assessment or a learning needs assessment aligns this, you need to align this with strategic objectives and knowledge. Again, this one, prioritising the learning needs, align this with strategic objectives and knowledge, but also discuss risk associated with not doing or prioritising these learning needs. What will the result be if you don't prioritise them? Decide the learning required to meet the needs. This needs to be flexible and adapted to the learning styles in the area of need. Determine the most effective way to deliver the learning activities, not just face-to-face training, as we know this is not possible en masse, and it is unclear how effective that it has been in the past. We need to use a combination of learning and learning styles by doing through others and training in various formats. Establishing how these learning activities will be completed, including tangible and smart indicators, timelines, and needed resources. And we need to consider how these learning activities will be monitored and evaluated, not just counting how many in training and how many participated. We need qualitative and quantitative, as well as the normal results. So let's look at a capacity needs assessment or a learning needs assessment. We really encourage and advocate for capacity or learning needs assessments to be conducted prior to any CPiE training. Learning and development plans and strategies, including training plans, should be developed based on evidence of the need in which it will meet. A few simple steps are required to develop a capacity needs assessment at a country and/or regional level. You need to have consultation and agreement with the coordination group on the need to assess capacity. Develop a short needs assessment survey, and this can be done by a SurveyMonkey with the support of the Global Level Alliance. You can create a report presenting the capacity needs identified and ensure monitoring is included in the subsequent plans with clear timelines and costing. If we just look at training plans, for example, you need to think about how these needs can be best addressed and when. Often we're not even doing proper training plans across the sector or even at a local level, and this is illustrating that we're trying to do one-off events to fix a broad problem rather than being very strategic and seeing it as a journey. We need to think beyond simply delivering trainings and consider developing training resource pools, coaching, mentoring, and looking after yourself as humanitarian workers. We need to develop a 12-month learning and development strategy, including costs and indicators. So if we look at this and we translate this into a strategy that's going to be translated into action, basically a learning and development strategy is really just a statement of intent, and just like anything, if you don't actually have action associated with it, it's just a document that will sit on the shelf. So more detail is really needed to provide guidance on how it will be implemented and who will translate this intent into practice. So setting learning and development priorities across the sector and supporting organisations that have different needs to decide how often organisational, team and individual learning needs should be analysed, and who will set the priorities that form the learning plan for the next period. Performance management and appraisal. Using performance management techniques, including supervision and coaching, can help to achieve targets by, amongst other things, making sure teams have the right level of capability and identifying gaps early. Individual development needs may be included in the appraisal or development reviews based on the setting of learning goals and personal development plans. Resources for learning and development. We know that funding is a problem. Budgets and resource planning are clearly critical to the effective implementation of a learning strategy. Being open-minded to what can be achieved with little or no budget is also very useful. Learning strategies can benefit from harnessing the knowledge within and across the sector. So what kind of learning methods we need to be asking? Questions that may help determine the nature of learning and development provisions include the following. Should internal staff or outside consultants deliver the learning interventions? What forms of learning, technical skills or leadership development, for instance? Coordination will be encouraged. What relationship should there be between learning and formal qualifications? For example, should learning be accredited by educational institutions? Are any government-backed programs appropriate to help meet learning needs within the sector? Is there a good range of formal and informal learning opportunities available? What can learners do to enable them to continue applying learning? Given that effective implementation of L&D strategy is critical to success, it's essential to regularly review and assess the use of learning activities. Deciding how evaluation will be measured before the learning takes place is a sound principle of a learning and development strategy. We can't forget innovation. The innovation imperative is becoming more and more critical. Organisations are constantly seeking to innovate and find novel solutions to the challenges they face, and our sector should be no different. L&D strategies should therefore specifically address innovation and will need to adopt an agile approach with regular reviews to incorporate the changing needs of the sector and the availability of new technology. And we can't forget fairness and equity. While learning opportunities may be restricted to high potential or high performing individuals in some sectors and locations, the L&D strategy should ensure that no discrimination occurs in access to learning resources between individuals, for example, based on gender or ethnicity. Some may go further than preventing discrimination in selection for learning opportunities by making provisions to offer extra resources to develop the skills of underrepresented groups. Creating an ethnically sound L&D strategy will encourage all to engage with learning and shared community and a sound practice. So if we bring this together, while the focus will remain across the Alliance with learning and development on outcome number 3 in the work plan, which says the child protection in emergencies workforce is strengthened, the Alliance looks at a broad perspective when it comes to an L&D strategy. It needs to be competency-based. It needs to be based on assessing needs in various contexts and levels. We need to ensure that we adapt quality resources. We need to base all training plans on evidence. And we need to maintain flexibility in delivery and adaptability to change. And we need to be able to measure our results and outcomes. So let's look at measuring success, because it hasn't been something that we've been great at in learning and development in the past. And we need to be moving beyond counting trainings or workshops that were delivered, moving beyond the number of people being trained, moving towards plans, planning and implementation of planning, moving towards measuring end results for children, looking at pre- and post-confidence surveys, looking at pre- and post-tests for training that is delivered, conducting impact evaluations, so surveys and guided interviews maybe 3 to 5 months after the learning time, developing indicators to measure longer term impact, and having an easier way to measure the use and usefulness of coaching and mentoring sessions, including hours spent and the outcomes from them, and ensuring learning outcomes are clear for all L&D activities with smart indicators for measurement. So what tools do we have available? We have sample surveys for basic level needs assessments. We have the competency-based framework. We have the sample template for basic L&D plans, sample template for individual learning plans, sample template for training plans, and we can give technical support as well. So these are 2 examples of capacity needs analysis that was done with the CPAOR, so the global subcluster, and under the guidance of the CPWG at the time. And basically we did a preliminary survey monkey in Lebanon, and then there was one that was done across the Pacific, and these were done in 2013. So these are one of the first ones that we did, and we created these reports from them, and they were basically 2-page reports, and it led into developing plans. And the advantage of these is that they started to build some evidence on why they wanted to have certain strategic goals and objectives in their longer term plans. Now this is the Syrian child protection capacity gap assessment that they did, and they finished at mid last year. And their methodology also was fairly simple. They did a desk review initially of information that already existed. They did key informant interviews, and then they used our survey template and adapted it to their needs and translated it accordingly. They had 95 surveys that were completed across 5 countries. They had 46 organisations that participated. And this was useful for planning, including realising that 41% of all respondents were planning to run some type of CP training in the next 6 months, and supports that they might need for collaboration and quality assurance across these trainings. They also found out that 77% of training opportunities were face-to-face training, which in this particular environment may not be the most effective to meet the growing needs. More than 30% of the workforce had no skills or knowledge on children affected by armed conflict, And in other areas, between 30 to 40% have only basic knowledge and skills. I mean, this report really lays a foundation of an evidence-based approach to learning and development, and also enables the key stakeholders to approach donors with a clear needs and analysis as they move forward. So this is the sample learning and development plan. It's fairly basic, this one. You've got the overall outcome, which you can change to your local level coordination group outcome or your local level sectorial outcome. And then it's got the training and development required, the priority levels, what competency it's associated with, and what minimum standard, what your targeted audience is, what your expected benefit is, what your cost is, and who's responsible for organising everything, as well as target dates for review. And then there's a training template for training plans. So these are very simple ones, so you can do much more in depth, and obviously you need to do the needs analysis first. We do have an old version of the individual learning and development plan templates, which we updated as well. And this is for individuals to do with their managers or a mentor. And it also includes an action plan. Any questions?
We don't have
a lot of information.
It is. You've covered a lot of things. That's wonderful, Natalie. So if people have questions, they can pop up their hands or again type them into the question box. I can see one that comes up in many locations, and that's around how to access funds to move to this kind of strategy, to have more than just a workshop, to do the capacity needs assessment, to look at monitoring and evaluation, as well as to look at different platforms and just a workshop for 25 people in a room. What advice do you have about either finding new sources of funding for that or stretching the dollars that we do have?
Well, I mean, a capacity needs assessment doesn't have to be an expensive venture. You know, Indonesia did one where they had 182 respondents to the needs to the actual survey. So they did a survey, and then they did a basic desk review of information that was already there. So the survey didn't cost them anything because it was via SurveyMonkey. It was really the time of the individuals to do the analysis afterwards and pull it together, much like the Syrian one. But it can be done, and you will see more funds coming in if you do that needs analysis first, as opposed to spending $5,000 to $10,000 on a training that, you know, is trying to fix every problem, every learning and development need. You can have a strategy that could be aligned with universities or tertiary institutions in the locations that you're at that are looking at online options and courses that are available by independent institutions. You can have face-to-face training that could meet an immediate need, but it's going to be far more cost-effective for donors long-term, and then they know that it's based on evidence. So I've seen more money coming into places where they have some type of needs analysis completed first, and their plans align with that needs analysis. So they may not even have a well-developed learning and development strategy, but when they're putting training or learning and development opportunities into their overall sector plans, they're getting far more funds associated with it because the donors have a more in-depth understanding of what's going on.
Wonderful, thanks. We have another question from another Natalie who's online. She's asking, are there any tips for learning and development when there's high staff turnover?
Well, quite often, I mean, this is one of our difficult areas, but the research would say that if we have well-developed learning and development strategies that consider career and personal advancement, which we talked about in the webinar, as part of that strategy, so you do have individual plans and people feel like they're being invested in, you have less staff turnover. So there's a lot of data around that outside of our industry, in more sort of private industries. We haven't really tried that. So my sense is that if we invest in people, as in we look at their career, we look at what they need to advance their career, and we have a strategy that's built around that investment, as well as looking at self-care for humanitarians, so minimising burnout, doing some of the work that humanitarian wellbeing does, making sure that everyone is not just in the base of their brain and that they're fully thinking and functioning, you'll have less staff turnover.
And in terms of a strategy, when, if there continues to be, for other reasons beyond just investing in their career, a lot of staff that we need to gear up, or we need to shrink the staff, or people do leave for their own personal reasons or security reasons and so on. Any advice on the strategy itself on how to make sure it's adaptable? Or
well, I guess it's around how we think as a sector, because usually those people will move to another part of the sector, so the learning isn't necessarily lost. The best way to do learning and development is to have a long-term vision. If you do one-off training because this year you've got this cohort of staff and next year you're going to have a new cohort of staff, and you adjust your strategy based on high turnover, what that will inevitably do is encourage that high turnover. So I think we have to have a longer-term vision around that. Child protection systems all over the world have high turnover, and one of the biggest reasons for that, in fact the number one reason for that, is because of burnout and other well-being issues, not having a career, not knowing where their career path is. And people would argue that in the humanitarian sector, the child protection field is exactly the same. We don't have a clear strategy of career or where we'd be moving, whether it be in an administrative format or whether it's in face-to-face casework or whether it's in the juvenile justice sector. So we don't have a clear vision of where our careers go. And that makes it difficult for people to see where they're going to end up. And unless we assist people in looking at what they want to do, what their strengths are, what their learning styles are, and looking at the strategy, adjusting a strategy accordingly, we will continue to have high turnover.
Great, thanks. Varsha, I see your hand up. I haven't noticed whether it's gone down or not. So,
this time, yeah. I just wanted, I don't have a question, but I really appreciate the point which has been raised, like people have different learning habits. So we have been trying to incorporate all sort of, people like those who can do something, try to involve people in different ways, like doing or listening or sharing experiences. So we have been in a couple of workshops, I have used whole person process facilitation, WPPF, and in that method we try to involve participants holistically, like his or her body, mind, spirit and emotions. So that has worked very well. So I really like the point you have raised, that different people have different learning methods, and we should be conscious about, and the whole training should be, training should be designed in such a way that every participant gets something out of it through their own learning methods. So that's all I wanted to share.
Lovely, thanks.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, exactly right. We need to be looking at delivering our learning to meet various learners, as well as cultures too, because in different cultures, different learning styles prevail, and also there are cultural elements for people not to be able to learn. And particularly in a face-to-face format, so being creative about the delivery is also important.
Any other questions or experiences people would like to share?
I do want to emphasise, though, really the importance of self-care and that element being part of our strategy as well, because people can't learn if they're not looking after themselves and they don't have a vision for themselves.
Absolutely. And you've done quite a bit of work, and there's a number of resources that's available through the Alliance looking at this for staff, yes?
Yeah. Yes, and a session as well that you can add on to any training.
Wonderful. So people can take a look at that if you don't know of it. And going to the Alliance's website, you should be able to track down that resource that Natalie just mentioned, the particular session on staff self-care. Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions at the moment or items to share, then we'll bring this webinar to an end. I want to thank the speaker, Natalie McCauley, for sharing her time and expertise and wonderful examples and insights from the various places in which she's worked and worked with. Also a thanks to our colleague Jed Gorlock of Plan International, who's been helping behind the scenes with the logistics. As I mentioned in the chat box, the resource pack that Natalie mentioned will be sent around in the next day to the emails that you provided. So do feel free to get that. I see Barsha's hand up again, so I'm going to unmute you. Barsha, is there something?
Yeah, I have raised my hand. Please do share some good learned material like best practices or the experiences around CPiE around the world. You know, many things are available in Google, but some good stories if you get to know, because we may be surfing in the Google, but if some good document or experiences which we can go through as a learning process. That's
super. All right.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
A call to share those best practices with each other and through the Global Alliance at that level. So I just also wanted to let you know, since people are online, about our next webinar in this series. It's on Wednesday, June 7th, and we'll be examining the different ways that we use mapping in child protection and emergencies work. So some of us know body mapping, some of us do community services mapping, and so on. So whether we're working with children or community members or other service providers, this might be a session for you or some of the colleagues that you know. I hope you'll be able to join me and our guest speaker, Claire O'Kane, on Wednesday. So all the details of that webinar and future sessions in this series are on the Alliance website. We've done them mostly in English. We've done one in French, and we'll be looking to include more sessions in French, Spanish, and Arabic as we're going forward. If you have any suggestions for topics or for speakers, we'd love to hear from you as well. Otherwise, a big thank you to Natalie. And we wish you all the best, and goodbye for now.